بسم الله والحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على مصطفى. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In this reflection, we want to consider the idea of curriculum design and the whole idea of the importance of a curriculum in the life of a student of knowledge. A curriculum simply means a set of texts that are chosen and selected because of their nature and quality and their contents and how they relate one to the other. What we find is that in many institutions in the Muslim world, the whole concept of curriculum design is something which has been given the utmost attention. So we find the curriculum of the Deobandi educational system, the curriculum of Azhar al-Sharif, the curriculum of Dar al-Hadith in Mecca, the curriculum that's followed in Mauritania. So we find that the ulama are consistent in the idea of a curriculum being necessary in any serious study of Islamic sciences. Now, what we find is that some texts are better than others in that those texts teach us the underlying principles of various Islamic sciences and how they're applied. So, when we talk about following a curriculum, we should likewise think about the conditions for Ijtihad. And the conditions for Ijtihad are spelled out in detail in the books of Usul al-Fiqh, and there is some variation regarding what is to be considered the set of conditions for Ijtihad to be followed. But overall, there's a set body of knowledge which should be understood and mastered. How much memorization takes place is a point of debate. Whether logic is a requirement or not is a point of debate. So we find that the ulama differ on some technical points in regards to the conditions of ijtihad. If we were to do this topic justice, we would have to present research on the different methodologies of ijtihad and the conditions that govern those methodologies. And even prior to that, what is ijtihad itself? Simply put, ijtihad is to engage research methodology in trying to understand the Quran and the Sunnah, to exert oneself in that process of trying to understand to the point of limitation. And it has to be scholarly, and it has to be governed by principles that are understood by other ulama. That way that ijtihad can be verified. And here we have almost like a peer recognition process going on. In any event, what we want to point to is the idea that the conditions for ijtihad are spelled out in even the basic texts that we have that deal with usul al-fiqh. If some of these terms are not understood, it's advised that they be looked up. Ijtihad, usul al-fiqh. This conversation is for that student of knowledge who has some understanding of what ijtihad is, at least, even if only in brief or in a shallow sense. When we study, we should do so according to a curriculum. So the curriculum as is designed should open us up to the process of ijtihad. In other words, the end goal of the curriculum should be ijtihad. In order to be able to achieve that goal, this curriculum has to be governed by these conditions. In other words, we have to have a clear idea of what ijtihad is. What are the conditions for engaging ijtihad? Then we select those texts which will allow us to develop a curriculum to meet these goals that are set out by the scholars. So we have to understand that studying Islamic sciences requires that we have familiarity with text intimately. We have to understand how texts operate, how they work, what their functions are, what degree of knowledge is being communicated in them, how well written they are, how well dependable they are. If they're written by scholars that are just ulama that are transmitting opinions, or they're written by scholars who are interested in the whole process of metacognition, of understanding how a process takes place. That's a different type of read than just reading somebody who's telling you so and so said that Sheikh so and so said that Sheikh so and so said, versus someone who will tell you Sheikh so and so said this, but the proof that he had wasn't strong enough. And another scholar said, well, his grasp on this concept wasn't as strong either, so his proof and his grasp weren't sufficient in order to substantiate his argument. That's a higher level of discussion. So when you engage those type of texts, and this is not necessarily a text full of refutation, because we're talking about we're talking about people that are collaborating in the effort together. They're not necessarily against each other. So it's not like a refutation is taking place for the sake of undermining the argument of the other. No, people are working constructively together to try to come to a position of truth. So we find that this is what takes place in the madhabs. This is what takes place in the schools of Islamic jurisprudence and in the schools of philosophy of law, philosophy of Islamic law, which we call usul al-fiqh. So, coming to this whole idea of designing curriculum according to the conditions of ijtihad, it's a very important concept, because that means then that we would have to have a good grasp of hadith sciences, the Arabic language, the aims and objectives of the Sharia, and familiarity with the tafsir of the Quran and those other sciences which follow in the sciences of the Quran. And we would have to be able also to understand how do we read society and culture and people and so on and so forth. So curriculum design then would demand of us that we understand the conditions of ijtihad, and then we set out bodies of knowledge that are to be studied systematically, which will allow us to achieve that aim and that goal.